The conference room at the credit union wasn't built for confrontation, but that morning, it held one anyway. There were 8 of us around the table: a compliance officer, 2 board members, a woman from legal, and at the far end, my younger brother, Ethan Miller, sitting straight-backed, hands folded, already certain of the outcome. My name card read, Claire Miller. Ethan cleared his throat before anyone asked him to speak. My sister abused her access, he said calmly. She moved funds without authorization. I didn't want to bring this here, but I had no choice. The words landed hard, not because they were loud, but because they were prepared. I said nothing. The compliance officer glanced at me, pen hovering. This was the part where people usually protested, explained, cried. I kept my eyes on the table's edge, where the laminate was peeling slightly, the same way it always had. Ethan continued. She's always handled the family accounts, he added, his voice steady. We trusted her. That trust was misplaced. Trust. Past tense. Someone shifted in their chair. A board member sighed softly, the sound of a decision forming before facts had a chance. Ms. Miller, the compliance officer finally said, do you wish to respond? I lifted my head. No, I said. The silence after that was uncomfortable. People don't like quiet when they expect defense. Silence makes them fill the gaps themselves. If you're following this story and you want to understand why I stayed silent in that room, why I let my own brother accuse me without pushing back, consider subscribing, leaving a like, or writing a comment. I read every single one, and it matters more than you think. Now, let me tell you how I ended up there. Before that meeting, most people described me the same way: dependable, careful, quiet. I was 49 years old and lived in Fort Collins, Colorado, in a small house I'd owned outright for years. No flash, no drama, just a place that stayed warm in winter and quiet at night. For most of my adult life, I worked as a payroll compliance auditor for mid-sized manufacturing companies. Not the kind of job people brag about. I checked wage records, verified overtime calculations, flagged discrepancies. I made sure numbers matched promises. I didn't manage people. I managed facts. Ethan liked to joke that I counted other people's money for a living. At family gatherings, he talked about his startup ideas, his networking events, his vision. I refilled drinks and listened. When our father died, handling finances fell to me by default. I didn't ask for it. No one else wanted it. Bills needed paying. Accounts needed tracking. Ethan was too busy getting his life off the ground. I never complained. I kept spreadsheets, printed statements, notes in the margins. The same habits I used at work followed me home without effort. That was the version of me everyone accepted. The reliable one. The background one. The sister who would handle things quietly and not ask for recognition. What they didn't see was how closely I paid attention. I noticed when transactions repeated oddly, when explanations shifted slightly from one conversation to the next, when Ethan spoke confidently about numbers that didn't line up, but I didn't challenge him. People mistake restraint for ignorance. I let them, because I'd learned something over the years. The truth doesn't need to be loud if it's documented. At that point, Ethan still believed the story belonged to whoever spoke first. He hadn't realized yet that I'd been listening the entire time. Ethan didn't start betraying me that day at the credit union. He started years earlier, when consequences were still small enough to hide. It happened after our mother moved into assisted living. Nothing dramatic, just the slow recognition that she needed help with stairs, medication, memory. The house was sold, and the proceeds were split the way she wanted. Simple, even, clean. At least, that was the plan. Ethan volunteered to handle the realtor paperwork. He said he had connections. I didn't question it. I was working 60-hour weeks back then, auditing payroll systems for a plant outside Cheyenne, driving home late, too tired to argue about details that seemed harmless. A month after the sale, Mom asked me a quiet question while we sat in the common room, watching afternoon light slide across the carpet. Why did the taxes take so much? She asked. I told her I wasn't sure. I said I'd check. When I did, the numbers didn't add up. Not drastically, just enough to feel wrong. A few thousand missing from Ethan's share, supposedly redirected to cover closing complications. I asked him about it over the phone. "You're overthinking again," he said, laughing lightly. "It was all explained in the paperwork." I asked for the paperwork. He sent me summaries. No originals, no signatures. I let it go. Not because I believed him, but because pushing would have made things uncomfortable. And I'd spent most of my life being the one who absorbed discomfort, so other people didn't have to. That was the pattern. Ethan moved quickly, I moved carefully. And when something didn't feel right, I assumed the problem was my caution, not his speed. Later, when I learned he'd taken a short-term loan against his portion without telling anyone, I was already complicit in my silence. That was the first time he learned something important about me. If things went wrong, I wouldn't expose him publicly. And once someone learns that, they stop fearing the truth. My grandfather, Walter Miller, never raised his voice. He didn't need to. He had been a shop foreman for most of his life, the kind who kept a notebook in his back pocket and never trusted memory alone. Every order, every shipment, every promise written down, dated, initialed. When I was 12, he caught me erasing a mistake in my homework. "Don't erase," he said gently. "Cross it out. Let yourself see what you got wrong." I didn't understand then. I do now. After my grandmother died, Walter lived alone for years. I visited him every Sunday. We drank weak coffee and talked about ordinary things: weather, grocery prices, the neighbors' habits. One afternoon, he handed me a small, leather-bound notebook. "You notice things," he said. "Most people don't. Write them down." When he passed, there was no inheritance to fight over. Just that notebook, empty, except for his name on the inside cover. I started using it without ceremony. At work, at home, dates, conversations, numbers that didn't sit right. Not because I expected betrayal, but because patterns reveal themselves only if you give them somewhere to land. By the time Ethan accused me at the credit union, that notebook had been filled twice over. He didn't know it existed. He didn't know that every transfer, every temporary adjustment, every explanation that changed slightly over time had already been recorded. Walter used to say, "People rush when they think they're winning." I had learned to wait. The letter arrived by certified mail. Not dramatic, not threatening, just official enough to change the air in my house. It informed me that the credit union had opened a formal internal review regarding unauthorized movement of funds. My access to several family-linked accounts would be temporarily restricted, pending investigation. Ethan hadn't reported me impulsively. He'd prepared. Within days, people who once deferred to me for explanations stopped asking questions. The tone of emails shifted. Polite words, colder spacing. I recognized it immediately. The language of liability. Ethan called that night. "I didn't want it to go this far," he said. But they started asking questions. He spoke as if events had momentum of their own, as if he weren't the one who'd pushed the first domino. "I think it would help if you stepped back," he added. "Just until this clears." Stepped back meant surrendering the narrative. I declined. That was when the paperwork started to change shape. Ethan submitted statements suggesting I'd consolidated funds for convenience. He referenced verbal approvals that never happened. He implied urgency where there had been none. He didn't forge documents. He reframed them. What surprised me wasn't the accusation. It was how easily others accepted it. Because Ethan sounded confident. Because I sounded careful. And confidence, to many people, feels like truth. The review expanded. A compliance officer requested transaction histories. A legal liaison asked for clarification on my role. Each question assumed guilt without saying the word. By the end of the week, my professional reputation, built quietly over decades, felt fragile. Not broken, but bending. No one fired me. That would have been easier. Instead, I was placed on temporary administrative leave out of an abundance of caution. My clients were reassigned. My email access limited. My phone stopped ringing. I didn't leave the house much that week. I took long walks in the mornings, just after sunrise, when Fort Collins was still half asleep. The streets were empty. The quiet felt earned. At home, I opened Walter's notebook. Page after page. Dates, amounts, conversations I'd recorded without knowing how much they'd matter. That was when I saw it. A repeating transfer amount. Not round, not random. The same odd cents appearing across 3 accounts over 4 months. I cross-checked bank statements against payroll audit logs from my professional files. Habits overlapping in a way that felt almost accidental. The numbers didn't match Ethan's explanations. They matched each other. Still, doubt crept in at night. What if I was wrong? What if silence had cost me too much? What if careful wasn't enough this time? I sat at my kitchen table one evening, lights off, notebook open, wondering how easily a life built on integrity could be questioned by someone who spoke louder. That was the lowest point. Not fear, not anger, isolation. If you've ever been doubted quietly, pushed aside without being confronted directly, or made to feel small because someone else controlled the story, leave a comment below. You don't have to explain, just know you're not alone. Stay with me. This is where things begin to change. The amount was $6,413.27. I noticed it because it didn't belong anywhere. It wasn't a rounded figure. It wasn't tied to a known bill or transfer schedule. It appeared once in a savings account summary, then again 2 weeks later in a different account, labeled as a temporary adjustment. A month after that, the same amount down to the cents showed up again, this time routed through an internal holding account. Different labels, same money. That's not how legitimate transfers behave. Legitimate money moves with purpose, not repetition. I laid the statements across my kitchen table, aligning dates the way I used to align payroll cycles at work. I checked posting times. All 3 transactions cleared late on Fridays, just before end-of-day processing. A classic place to hide something small enough not to trigger alerts until Monday, when attention is scattered. I checked the destination account. It wasn't mine. It wasn't Ethan's personal account either, which surprised me at first. It belonged to a limited partnership registered under a neutral name, Front Range Consulting Group. The address was a shared office suite in Denver. The registered contact was a corporate services firm that specialized in privacy. Too clean. I pulled the formation documents. The partnership had been created 18 months earlier, right around the time Ethan started helping more aggressively with family finances. The authorized signer was listed as E. Miller, not illegal on its face. Not yet. But it was a place money could pause, rest, disappear briefly before being redirected. I didn't react. I didn't confront Ethan. I didn't even mark the discovery in red. I turned the page and kept building the map. Once I knew where to look, the pattern widened. Front Range Consulting Group wasn't a destination. It was a pass-through. Over the course of a year, small sums moved into it and out again. Never large enough to draw scrutiny. Always framed as reimbursements, timing corrections, or internal balancing. The amounts varied, but the structure didn't. Money entered from family-linked accounts. Money exited to cover Ethan's short-term obligations, credit cards, bridge loans, deposits on projects he'd described as temporary. I traced the earliest transaction back to the period after our mother's house sold. The missing amount she'd asked about years ago, it matched. Not exactly, but close enough once fees and timing were accounted for. The same logic, the same method. This wasn't a single bad decision. It was a habit. I assembled a timeline that didn't editorialize. No accusations, just dates, amounts, sources, destinations. I added bank confirmations where I could get them independently, avoiding anything Ethan had ever forwarded. Then I found the emails. Archived. Overlooked. Short threads between Ethan and a credit union employee discussing temporary routing and short-term liquidity. Nothing explicit, just enough to show intent without spelling it out. The employee no longer worked there. I printed everything. Not because I planned to present it immediately, but because clarity changes how you breathe. Once the truth took shape, the isolation lifted slightly. Not replaced by relief, but by focus. Ethan had mistaken my silence for absence. He didn't realize I'd been documenting his story the entire time, waiting for it to contradict itself. And now, it had. I didn't bring the file to Ethan. I brought it to the credit union's external auditor, Linda Chavez, whose name appeared at the bottom of the review notice. We met in a glass-walled office that smelled faintly of copier toner and lemon cleaner. Linda didn't ask why I'd waited. She asked how I'd organized the material. Chronologically, I said. by source and destination. She nodded once. That was all the encouragement I needed. I laid everything out. Statements pulled directly from institutions, partnership filings for Front Range Consulting Group, the repeating amounts, the Friday postings, the emails that used careful language to avoid promises. I didn't narrate. I let the sequence speak. Linda took notes without interrupting. When she finished reviewing the timeline, she asked for permission to verify independently. I welcomed it. Verification was the point. Over the next 2 weeks, the questions I received changed tone. They were no longer about why I'd moved funds. They were about who authorized routing changes, about the partnership, about whether I had ever signed a document granting Ethan discretion. I hadn't. Linda confirmed what my records suggested. Funds had been temporarily rerouted through an entity controlled by Ethan without proper authorization, then returned selectively, sometimes late, sometimes incomplete, to mask the movement. It wasn't embezzlement in the dramatic sense. It was liquidity abuse. Quiet, calculated, repeated. The credit union froze the partnership-linked accounts pending further review. Ethan called me that evening, his voice tight. "They're overreacting," he said. "This is being blown out of proportion." I listened. He offered explanations that leaned on intent rather than permission, on urgency rather than consent, on the idea that family flexibility excused formalities. I said nothing, because by then, the case no longer needed my voice. The turning point came from someone I didn't expect. Mark Ellison, a junior compliance analyst, requested a meeting with Linda and me present. He'd been assigned to reconcile transaction logs early in the review busy work, I'd assumed, meant to confirm surface-level compliance. Mark looked exhausted. "I need to add something to the record," he said, hands folded tightly. I didn't realize it at first. He explained that several approvals had been processed under a temporary override protocol, a workaround meant for emergencies. The requests were framed as time-sensitive, and because the amounts were small and later reversed, they didn't trigger escalation. Except Mark had noticed a pattern. The reversals weren't symmetrical. Small differences accumulated. Fees appeared and disappeared inconsistently. The partnership account acted like a buffer, not a bridge. "I flagged it," he said quietly. "I was told it was family business." Linda asked, "Who told him?" "Mark, named Ethan." "I should have pushed back," Mark said. "But I didn't want to accuse someone who sounded so sure." He submitted his notes, including internal messages that confirmed Ethan had directed the routing, with language designed to sound compliant while avoiding explicit authorization. Mark didn't sound vindictive, just tired. "I don't want my name on something that isn't true," he said. That was enough. Within days, the credit union completed its findings. Ethan's access was revoked. The partnership accounts were ordered unwound. Restitution calculations began, precise, unemotional, complete. When Linda called to inform me, she didn't congratulate me. She said, "Thank you for being patient." Patience, I'd learned, was not passive. It was deliberate. The conference room at the credit union looked exactly the same. Same long table, same neutral walls, same faint smell of stale coffee and paper. The only difference was where people sat and who didn't. Ethan wasn't at the far end this time. He sat closer to the door, shoulders tense, his confidence reduced to something brittle. I took the same seat as before. I placed Walter's notebook in front of me, unopened. I didn't need it anymore. Linda Chavez began the meeting. Her voice was even, practiced. "The review is complete," she said, "including independent verification by external auditors and internal compliance." She distributed folders. No commentary, just documents. Front Range Consulting Group. Transaction timelines. Authorization gaps. Internal messages. Mark Ellison's statement. Reconciliation summaries showing cumulative discrepancies, not dramatic, but undeniable. Ethan tried to speak once. "I was managing cash flow," he said. "Nothing was taken permanently." Linda raised a hand. "This is not about intent. It's about authorization." No one looked at me. They didn't need to. The board chair cleared her throat. "Mr. Miller, your access privileges are terminated effective immediately. The partnership accounts are ordered closed, and restitution will proceed according to the audit findings." Ethan's face flushed. He glanced at me then, searching for something, anger, maybe, or relief. I gave him neither. I stayed silent, because the truth didn't require my reaction. It had already arrived. The meeting ended without drama. No raised voices, no apologies, just consequences, administered carefully. I stood, nodded once to Linda, and walked out of the room. Life didn't reset. It stabilized. The credit union finalized the restitution over several months. Numbers were corrected, accounts reconciled. The process was slow and precise, the way real accountability usually is. Ethan moved out of state. We didn't discuss it. We didn't need to. Some family members reached out eventually. Some didn't. I learned not to measure peace by consensus. I returned to work quietly. My leave was lifted. My clients reassigned back to me without ceremony. No one apologized. No one needed to. Trust isn't restored by words. It's restored by alignment. I kept Walter's notebook in my desk drawer, not as evidence anymore, but as habit, as reminder. Silence isn't weakness when it's chosen. It's restraint. I still live in the same house, drink the same coffee, walk the same streets in the morning when the town is quiet and honest. What changed wasn't my voice. It was who controlled the story. If this story reached you, if you've ever been underestimated, quietly blamed, or pushed aside because someone else spoke louder, thank you for staying until the end. If it helps, consider liking, subscribing, or sharing it with someone who needs to hear it right now. Another story is waiting for you.